Welcome to the Casa Sol Psychology Podcast. I'm your host, Nicole San Martin, registered mental health counselor intern here in Florida, and ADHD and trauma therapist. I'm really excited for today's episode because it's something that keeps coming up a lot in my personal life, like from friends and family, and also from clients and in-session and intro calls, or even stuff I'm seeing online. And that is how to be consistent. And specifically, how to be consistent when you have ADHD and or trauma. Because inherently, consistency is so much harder when you're dealing with ADHD or trauma. It's an extremely common symptom. And it can really harm us and make us feel worse about ourselves because a lot of us do want to be more consistent. Consistency is how we meet our goals, right? So when we struggle with that, it can really affect our sense of self and our self-esteem, and especially because it affects so many areas of our lives. So we're going to talk practical, somatic, and cognitive strategies all mixed together for how to improve consistency. Because when you have ADHD or trauma, the reality is being consistent is going to be harder for you than for everyone else. With work and time and energy, we can improve it. It's not that all hope is lost, but we do need to accept it's going to be harder than for other people. And by accepting that, that is the first step towards creating more consistency in our lives. So like we said, there's a lot of places that inconsistency can show up that really affects us. So that can be consistency in the gym or in our exercise. It can be consistency in our habits or in our schoolwork or our work. And this is taboo, but we can even have trouble with consistency with hygiene, right? When we have ADHD or trauma. Hygiene in the sense of like brushing our teeth, showering, laundry, all those things can be harder. And, it's not always easy to talk about. Inconsistency can also affect relationships, right? If we're not showing up consistently in them, we can accidentally push people away and end up feeling lonelier. And that's not a good feeling either. And outside of productivity, we can struggle with consistency when it comes to our hobbies, right? Like for me, I wish I was better at crocheting or knitting already, but that does require consistency, and it is a hobby that I'm on and off with. So that's just something, that I have to accept is a part of ADHD, for example. And I want to clarify and make sure that we all know this, that trouble with consistency does not mean that we are lazy. It's something that is simply a symptom. When we have ADHD or trauma, we cannot just write it off as laziness or being undisciplined. So I also want to talk about why this happens from an ADHD and trauma lens, because it can show up in both and show up looking similarly, but for completely different reasons. For example, when it comes to ADHD, this issue with being consistent or being inconsistent really comes from, first of all, an executive functioning problem. When we might be able to remember to be consistent, but then to execute and begin the task is really hard with ADHD. There's also the issue of time blindness that can affect us, and we don't realize what time it is or that we're late, and that can affect our consistency. And a big motivator for ADHD is novelty. Is something that we crave when we have ADHD, right? But when we're consistent, we can get bored of things really fast. And then when it's not novel anymore, we're not really motivated to keep working on that one goal and keep making steps there. Now, when it comes to trauma, these consistency challenges stem from nervous system dysregulation. And when our nervous system is overwhelmed, that can send us into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So if we're frozen, we're in freeze mode, that, we're not going to be able to get to work or focus or be productive in what we want to be consistent in. And the reality is, when we're under stress, under this nervous system dysregulation, we have less capacity for focus, right? Like usually the things that we want to be consistent in aren't survival focused. So our nervous system is like, why would I focus on this? This is like really unimportant. Like you're being consistent at work or with your hygiene is like not directly related to survival. So I don't want to spend time and energy working on those things. Actually, we're focused on survival. That's what the nervous system is inherently saying or motivated by. So that's the big barrier there when it comes to trauma. Now, when we have both ADHD and trauma, that's of course a whole other story. It's a combination of what we just talked about, and it creates this perfect storm that can make it especially hard to be consistent. So remember, all the reasons about why this happened were related to neurobiology and to the nervous system, not character flaws, not moral failings or anything like that. The issue with inconsistency is that it can lead to a lot of shame and going into these shame spirals that are obviously horrible to experience and make us feel horrible about ourselves, right? Remember, shame is the feeling of wanting to hide, that if someone sees us, that we're going to be rejected. So, of course, when we're so inconsistent, it can make us feel like we're not good enough and make us feel ashamed and not want other people to know or realize that we're struggling with consistency. With shame, there's a lot of common narratives, ways that we talk to ourselves happening, right? Can sound like I'm a failure, can sound like I'll never be consistent, I'm just lazy, I'm undisciplined. All of that is shame-based. And of course, this shame reinforces avoidance and dysregulation. So we get stuck there, and that shame blocks our productivity and ability to be consistent. Now I want to get into an exercise for us to have some awareness about what that shame does to our body, okay? So I'm going to invite you to close your eyes or lower your gaze if it's safe to do so. I want you to observe what's happening in your body as I read the following negative self-beliefs, okay? I keep trying to be consistent, but it feels like a sprint, and then I burn out and I can't keep going. People have told me I'm not living up to my potential because sometimes I do great work and other times I totally mess up. If I can just be consistent, I'll actually get somewhere instead of being stuck where I am and miserable forever. Or I need to hurry up and get it together so I can be better and finally feel proud of myself. Or even I'm useless, I'm incompetent, I can't do anything. Now I want you to notice some shifts in sensation. Some common bodily responses to shame might be a tight scalp, right? Tightness in the jaw, tightness in the forehead. You might notice some tightness in the shoulders. You might notice chest tightness or an urge to slouch, an urge to hide. Maybe your heart started beating faster. Maybe it became harder to breathe a little bit. You may have noticed an urge to avoid or to shut down. So this is key information. Our body gives us a lot of really useful information. You might notice these phrases create this shutdown or this very negative sensation in our body that is not motivating, right? When we tell ourselves these things, it doesn't work to get us going and to be consistent and to be productive. We need to keep that in mind. With these negative phrases, we're creating paralysis and avoidance. And we think sometimes that we need to tell ourselves those things to get ourselves going, but really it's the opposite. They're holding us back. Now that we talked a little bit about why inconsistency can happen with ADHD and trauma, I want to really recognize that understanding why something happens doesn't equal being able to change and fix the behavior. So it isn't a great first step, but now we want to figure out how we can actually start being consistent. It's really important that we redefine consistency when we have ADHD or trauma, because we're not going to be able to have as rigid and inflexible of a definition to consistency as people without ADHD or trauma. We just can't. It is really important that we're not holding ourselves to standards that aren't meant for us. So we have to recognize consistency can look like long-term progress, but not consistency in the day-to-day, right? If we look at a graph of the efforts that we make towards our goals and in being consistent, it might be all over the place. Hopefully we see an overall upward trend over a long period of time, but we cannot expect it to be very linear. We just cannot. And we have to accept that we're going to have a lot of off days. And in accepting that, we can encourage ourselves to keep going and just recognize, okay, that's part of this. It's okay. I can still be consistent. I can still keep going. So here's the truth. More flexibility equals more consistency. More rigidity creates less consistency. That's just how it works when we have ADHD or trauma. So what does flexibility actually look like? How do we implement that? It can look like starting over again and again without punishing ourselves for having to start over, without punishing ourselves for our mistakes or errors or setbacks. We cannot punish ourselves for that because we're punishing ourselves for trying again. We're not going to want to try again when we punish ourselves. Instead, we need to give ourselves grace, compassion, or at a minimum, neutrality. We have to remove this moral judgment on ourselves from our errors or lapses. And it's also really important that we adjust our goals based on our capacity. If we have ADHD or trauma, our capacity might look different, right? Sometimes it does look like less, and that's okay, right? But it's not always about less. Sometimes it's about it looking different. Something that actually, a goal that fits us and what we want and desire and how we actually function, right? When we have ADHD or trauma. So having a flexible mindset looks like having let's try again tomorrow. It's okay. Whatever happens, I can't change the past. I can only change the future. Let's just try again. Every time I try again, I learn something new. So let's just try again. And whatever happened before, it's okay. We can still improve. We can still make changes. And I want to give a really light example in my personal life, how I've implemented this. And that's for me, exercise. For the last 10 years or so, I've been consistently exercising. Now notice I use a really broad word with exercise because about every 3 to 6 months, I change my workout goals. I change my gym, the studio, or just my routine. I change it. And for me, as someone with ADHD, that's worked for me, right? Because we know I crave novelty. So consistency for me has looked like keeping a variety. And I also want to clarify what consistency has looked like for me, right? Probably there was 1 year in those 10 years where I didn't exercise almost at all. And notice I'm still considering it consistency because we're looking at the overall trend. Over 10 years, was I still consistent? Yes. Was there 1 month out of all of those 10 years that I also took a break from exercise? It might have been from going on vacation and losing my routine, getting sick, school, work, just life, right? And maybe each of those times after I took those breaks, I may have started out with some of those shameful phrases or shamed phrases, shaming myself and punishing myself for not being as consistent as I would like, right? It can sound like you're never going to get anywhere if you keep taking these breaks, or why did you stop? Why didn't you prioritize this? But I use those opportunities to stop and notice every time I allow my mind to stay stuck on these shameful thoughts, I get even more stuck. Let me stop and reframe and change the narrative in my mind so that I actually want to go back to exercising, that I don't associate exercise with failure. Instead, it's like something that's like, well, it's okay. Yeah, I took a break for a month. Or yeah, the last few weeks I've only gone and exercised once or twice a week. Oh well, big whoop. Let me get back to it. No big deal. So consistency for me looks like long breaks sometimes, and that's okay. It's still consistency to me. If we look at the overall trend over 10 years, was I still consistent? Yes. Do I feel in shape and do I still enjoy exercising? Yes. And that's the point, that I still enjoy it. I found my way to be consistent and to enjoy exercising. So that leads me to my point. Being kinda consistent is actually the goal, right? When we say it's okay to be kinda consistent, that's when we can actually achieve it and not really give up on being consistent or working on our goal for good. So a lot of times, even with ADHD and trauma, there's a place where this shame and perfectionism originates. And we have this belief that we carry that if I'm not perfect, I'm not worthy. If I'm not productive, I'm not worthy. If I don't have this evidence of what I've done, I'm not worthy. When really that's not true. And maybe I don't have to tell you that. Maybe logically it can be easy to believe, no, I know I'm worthy no matter what. But for a lot of us, it's really hard to emotionally, spiritually believe that. So some of this can come from a place where if when we grew up, our praise was really conditional, in the sense that our parents only praised us when we were absolutely perfect and maybe didn't praise us when we just did okay, didn't tell us good job when we got a B or a C. Instead, absolute perfection was the only thing that was somewhat rewarded. And maybe even then, it was the only thing that brought neutrality and didn't bring a punishment. It can also come from a very criticism-heavy childhood. With ADHD especially, we're more likely to be criticized for our symptoms and our ADHD-related mistakes. So, of course, we're going to internalize what we've heard over and over again. So what that creates is this idea that harsh self-talk is what's supposed to motivate us, right? That's the only way to keep going, because maybe we never even experienced what a positive and constructive encouragement looks like. We may not even know that that could work, but it really does. It is the most sustainable way to be consistent and productive when we are kind and forgiving instead of harsh and punishing in the way that we speak to ourselves. Something really interesting I've seen in my work as a trauma therapist and in the trauma processing sessions is how impactful processing your trauma can be. Once we process our trauma, our brain increases its cognitive flexibility and its cognitive adaptability, and it's easier for us to wrap our minds around a different perspective and a different way of speaking to ourselves. It can also be easier to create new beliefs, because when we have trauma, it really makes our core beliefs from the past, from that trauma, really stick with us and be really hard to shake. So the type of trauma processing that I use is trauma incident reduction, and I've seen how these trauma processing sessions have been magical for my clients. And it really marks a point in time, a before and after in their lives a lot of times. Part of that is because it creates more nervous system regulation, which allows us to adapt easier. It also allows us to shift our mindset and to switch from rigidity to flexibility. And processing our trauma creates changes that are physiological and behavioral. And that's like the coolest part about being able to do this work and being able to witness these changes in my clients. So I want to do another somatic exercise for rebuilding safety and self-compassion, okay? So again, I want to invite you to close your eyes or just lower your gaze and bring some awareness to the body. Try to just observe non-judgmentally what's happening from head to toe as I read the following positive statements. It's okay that consistency has been difficult for me. there is nothing wrong with me. I don't have to be perfect to make progress. I have succeeded before and I can succeed again. Starting over is not failure, it's part of the process. I am learning what works for me. I can be proud of small steps. My progress still counts even when it isn't linear. I don't have to rush my growth. I deserve kindness while I'm learning. I can be both imperfect and capable. Missing a day, a week, month, or even a year doesn't erase my efforts. I can trust myself to keep trying, however that looks. I don't need to earn my worth through productivity, and being compassionate with myself helps me move forward. You might notice a softening in your jaw or in your forehead or even your scalp. You might notice relaxation in the chest or in your breathing. It might be a little bit easier to breathe. You might have noticed your shoulders might have softened a little bit, might have moved back. You might feel an increased openness in your body or grounding. Again, these physical sensations are information. That you feel relief or any of these changes in your body are proof that a more positive and flexible and forgiving mindset is more helpful in getting consistent and getting productive. Now, I will say, if your core beliefs are currently very shame-based, it may have been uncomfortable and you may not have experienced as positive of physical sensations, and that's okay. That might mean you need more work and trauma processing to happen, and that is okay, right? I want to emphasize that there's no wrong way to respond to these exercises. At the end of the day, it's information for you to take into account and kind of give you a hint about what's going on for you in your body. So over time, if we change the way we talk to ourselves, if we process our trauma, if we tap into what our body's telling us about what will actually help us and create motivation for ourselves, over time, we can create change and improvement in our ability to be consistent. It's not going to be overnight, but this is where it starts. It starts with changing our beliefs about consistency and productivity and our worth. It's about redefining consistency for ourselves as people with ADHD and trauma. And it's also about understanding how our self-talk impacts our nervous system states. So remember, harshness usually leads to tension, shutdown, and avoidance. Meanwhile, compassion can create more openness, right? More flexibility and re-engagement and an ability to come back to something because it's still joyful, because we know when we try again, we won't be punished, or that one thing that we want to be better at won't create as much shame or stress for us. Instead, is more neutral, right? It makes it easier to come back to, or enjoyable. So I want to remind you that consistency is not about perfection. Instead, it's about returning as many times as you need to. And that is okay. You are allowed to be flexible and still make progress. And just a reminder, if you're looking for a therapist in Florida, you can sign up for a free 15-minute intro call on my website. That will be linked in the show notes. And I'm accepting clients across Florida for virtual sessions and also in person at my Coral Gables office. And please leave a comment letting me know what you thought about the somatic awareness exercises and if I should include that some more in future episodes. Wherever you're listening to this, make sure you subscribe or leave a rating. I'd really appreciate it. You can also find me on Instagram at Nicole Therapy. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Casa Sol Psychology Podcast. I will see you on the next episode.